The first thing people noticed was that his rhythm was wrong. Not weak. Not sloppy. Just wrong. In a gym where motion followed an unspoken code of symmetry and efficiency, where bodies moved in predictable patterns refined by mirrors and metrics, his movements disrupted the flow. He lifted the barbell with a pause that felt too long, as if he were waiting for permission from something unseen. He lowered it with a care that bordered on reverence, then stepped back and stood completely still, eyes fixed forward, not at his reflection but somewhere far beyond it. It was early morning, that gray hour when fluorescent lights hummed louder than conversation and the smell of rubber mats mixed with stale coffee. The regulars had already claimed their territory. They watched him the way gym people always watch outsiders, through mirrors, through reflections, through sideways glances sharpened by routine judgment. He wore an old gray t-shirt, the fabric thin from years of washing, darkened with sweat at the collar. His shorts were loose, practical, offering no outline of muscle or definition worth admiring. No headphones clamped over his ears. No phone glowing with timers or tracking apps. No shaker bottle clutched like a badge of belonging. Just silence. And that strange, deliberate cadence. On the treadmill, a man scoffed quietly and shook his head. Near the squat rack, two college-aged lifters whispered to each other, their laughter sharp and careless. "Man doesn't even know proper tempo," one of them muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Who pauses like that?" The man heard it. He always did. Years of listening for danger had trained his ears to catch sounds others filtered out. But he didn't react. He rolled his shoulders once, slow, controlled, then stepped back toward the bar as if responding to an internal command no one else could hear. His hands wrapped around the steel with a grip that looked unusual to anyone familiar with modern coaching cues. Thumbs tucked. Wrists aligned. No wasted tension. He inhaled deeply through his nose, held the breath for a measured count, and lifted. One rep. Then another. Each repetition was identical. Same speed. Same depth. Same quiet exhale at the top. No shaking. No grimacing. Just precision. 10 repetitions exactly. On the last one, his jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of effort he allowed to surface. He lowered the bar carefully, letting it settle without a clang. Then he stepped back. Feet together. Arms straight at his sides. Chin level. Eyes forward. 3 seconds. That was when the whispering stopped. A woman stretching nearby frowned, her body instinctively pausing mid-movement. A trainer froze in the middle of explaining a set to a client. Even the man on the treadmill glanced over, unsettled by something he couldn't quite name. The posture was unmistakable, even to those who had never been taught its meaning. It carried a weight that didn't belong in a gym, a discipline that felt borrowed from a place where mistakes carried consequences heavier than embarrassment. Then the moment passed. The man relaxed, shook out his arms, and moved on to the next station as if nothing had happened. The gym's noise rushed back in to fill the vacuum. Music thumped through speakers. Plates clanged. Conversations resumed, though quieter now, edged with curiosity. He repeated the pattern at every station. Lift. Pause. Stillness. Never rushing. Never skipping. Never adjusting his routine for the sake of efficiency or appearance. When he wiped down equipment, he did it meticulously, folding the paper towel twice before discarding it. When someone asked to work in, he stepped aside immediately, nodding once in acknowledgement, eyes calm, unreadable. People stared more openly now. Not because he was impressive in the conventional sense, but because he was unsettling. He didn't fit the unspoken hierarchy of the room. He wasn't chasing numbers. He wasn't competing for space or attention. And yet attention kept finding him. The scars didn't help. Thin white lines traced his forearms, old and faded but unmistakable. A jagged mark disappeared beneath the sleeve of his shirt, revealed only when he reached overhead. Someone noticed the way his left hand trembled slightly when he rested, how the tremor vanished the moment he returned to motion, as if stillness itself demanded too much. At the water fountain, a man with bulging biceps snorted. "You see that guy?" he said to his friend. "Looks like he's doing drills or something." "Yeah," the friend replied with a laugh. "Like boot camp, but slow motion." The man filled his paper cup carefully, the stream of water steady. He drank, set the cup down, and returned to his routine without a glance in their direction. He had learned long ago that silence weighed less than explanation. Words invited questions. Questions invited memories. And memories, once stirred, never settled quietly again. What no one in the gym understood was that this wasn't a workout. Not really. It was maintenance. Containment. A way to keep time from folding in on itself. Each set marked something lost. Each pause acknowledged something unfinished. The stillness after the lift wasn't rest, it was respect. The mirrors reflected his body but not his history. They showed a man moving wrong, out of step with modern fitness culture. They didn't show the weight of gear heavier than any barbell in the room. They didn't show sand grinding into skin, or the way silence could stretch so long it became unbearable. They didn't show moments when stillness meant survival and sound meant death. To the gym, he was an oddity. A curiosity. An older man clinging to a strange, outdated routine. To himself, he was holding the line. Every pause was deliberate. Every breath counted. Every moment of stillness was a promise kept, to men whose names were etched somewhere far from this place, to memories he carried alone, to a version of himself that refused to disappear completely. The gym kept watching. Amused. Confused. Dismissive. They thought his workout looked wrong. They had no idea how much discipline it took to make it look that way. He had not always moved this slowly. There was a time when speed was currency, when hesitation could fracture a mission and cost lives measured not in numbers but in faces. In those years, his body responded before thought, trained into obedience through repetition so relentless it erased doubt. Orders were absorbed, not debated. Motion was exact. Silence was absolute. Back then, his name carried weight. Rank gave it shape. Purpose gave it direction. He belonged to something vast and invisible, a machine that functioned only when every part moved exactly as intended. That identity had been stripped away quietly, without ceremony, folded into a final set of papers and a handshake that tried to feel like gratitude. Now, inside the gym, he was anonymous. He arrived every morning just after dawn, when the parking lot still glistened with overnight dew and the world felt undecided about what kind of day it would be. He checked in with a nod, never lingering, never chatting. He chose the same locker every time, even though the gym had no assigned system. Routine mattered. Consistency was a language he still trusted. It gave shape to hours that might otherwise blur into something dangerous. Years earlier, routine had been imposed on him. Now, it was chosen. There were days when his body resisted, when old injuries tightened in protest and nerve damage sent sparks of sensation down his arm without warning. Doctors had given those sensations names: permanent, degenerative, manageable, but he preferred simpler terms. Present. Bearable. Alive. He had learned to work with pain rather than against it. Fighting it only made it louder. Civilian life had surprised him in ways combat never did. There were no clear lines. No uniform signals. People spoke freely, loudly, overlapping one another without consequence. The gym was a microcosm of that chaos. Music thumped. Voices competed. Mirrors amplified everything: movement, ego, insecurity. He tried, once, to fit in. A trainer had offered him a free assessment, clipboard in hand, enthusiasm polished and rehearsed. Timed circuits. Explosive movements. Shouted encouragement. "You've got more in you," the trainer had yelled, clapping his hands inches from his face. Something inside him recoiled. The noise had pressed in from all sides, tightening his chest, sharpening his focus in the wrong direction. His heart rate spiked, not from exertion but from memory. He finished the session politely, thanked the trainer, and never scheduled another. He learned then that fitting in came at a cost he was no longer willing to pay. So he built his own system. His pauses were intentional. They were checkpoints. Moments to assess breathing, posture, awareness. In another life, those pauses came after commands, after objectives completed, after men were accounted for. Here, they came after 10 reps, after controlled effort, after making sure his hands were steady and his surroundings unchanged. People mistook the pauses for fatigue. They didn't understand that fatigue was loud, chaotic. What he practiced was control. The tremor in his left hand embarrassed him more than he liked to admit. It wasn't constant, but it surfaced when he was still, when there was nothing else for his body to do. Motion smoothed it out. Purpose steadied it. He kept moving because stopping invited too much awareness. The comments still reached him, even when he pretended they didn't. Why does he just stand there like that? Is he timing something? Looks like some kind of drill. Once, someone asked if he was injured. Another suggested yoga. He accepted the concern with a nod and no further explanation. Explaining led to questions. Questions led to stories. Stories led to nights that were harder to survive. There were moments, though, when the past surfaced without permission. Sometimes it was a smell, rubber mixed with metal and sweat, that transported him instantly. Sometimes it was the rhythmic clank of plates that echoed too closely to something else. He had learned to ground himself quickly. Count breaths. Identify exits. Remind himself where he was. Lift. Pause. Stillness. During one session, as he adjusted plates on a barbell, a young trainer approached again. Same clipboard. Same practiced confidence. The trainer smiled, professional and well-meaning. "Hey, sir," he said. "I've been watching your form. You could get more out of your sets if you reduced those pauses." He looked up slowly, meeting the trainer's eyes. The young man meant no harm. He saw inefficiency where there was intention. "I'm good," he said quietly. The trainer hesitated. "You sure? We could." "I'm sure." There was no edge in his voice. No challenge. Just certainty. The trainer nodded, a little flustered, and walked away. The interaction left a familiar ache in his chest, not anger, but distance. A reminder that his way would always look strange to those who had never needed it. As he returned to his set, memory intruded uninvited. A desert horizon. Heat shimmering like a mirage. A command given in a whisper because silence mattered more than clarity. The weight on his shoulders then had not been iron, but responsibility. He remembered standing perfectly still for what felt like hours, waiting for a signal that would change everything. He remembered learning that stillness could be an action, that restraint could be strength. Those lessons had followed him home. When he finished the set, he stood at attention. 3 seconds. Always 3. Long enough to remember the men who never left that horizon. Short enough to keep the memory from swallowing him whole. Across the gym, someone laughed at a joke unrelated to him. Life went on. It always did. But inside him, the discipline held. Quiet. Unseen. Unapplauded. His workout still looked wrong to anyone measuring progress by speed, sweat, or spectacle. But for him, it was the only way to keep moving forward without losing everything he had carried back with him. The moment that altered everything arrived disguised as nothing at all. It was a Wednesday, indistinguishable from the mornings before it. The same parking spot. The same locker. The same quiet nod to the front desk attendant who never asked his name. He moved through his warm-up with practiced ease, joints loosening, breath settling into its familiar rhythm. Lift. Pause. Stillness. The world narrowed to manageable dimensions. Then the sound hit. A 45-pound plate slipped from careless fingers across the room and slammed into the floor. The clang was sharp, metallic, violent in its suddenness. For most people, it was an irritation. A spike in noise quickly forgotten. For him, it was a breach. His nervous system reacted before thought could intervene. Muscles locked. Breath stopped mid-inhale. His eyes snapped toward the sound, scanning angles, distances, exits. The gym dissolved in an instant, replaced by dust and heat and the echo of explosions bouncing off concrete walls. The clang stretched unnaturally long, morphing into something else entirely, something incoming. His heart detonated in his chest. He did not fall. He did not shout. Training held him upright like an invisible brace. But he went completely still, frozen in a way that was no longer ritual but reflex. His hands curled into fists. His jaw clenched. His gaze fixed on nothing the gym contained. Seconds passed. People noticed. A woman near the stretching area slowed, then stopped altogether. A man re-racking weights glanced over, confused by the sudden rigidity of the older man by the bench. The trainer mid-sentence trailed off, sensing something wrong without understanding what. The barbell lay untouched at his feet. Inside him, time fractured. He was in two places at once, one safe and fluorescent, the other scorched and merciless. In the second place, silence was never accidental. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant someone was counting on you not to move. His chest tightened until breathing became an act of will. Ground yourself, he told himself. Name what's real. Rubber floor. Mirrors. Music. No dust. No shouting. Slowly, painfully, he forced air back into his lungs. His shoulders dropped a fraction. The gym reassembled around him like a set rebuilt after a fire. He was back. But the room had changed. Eyes lingered now, not with amusement but concern. Conversations faltered. No one laughed. Whatever had just happened did not belong to casual gym culture, and everyone felt it. He wiped his palms against his shorts, more to anchor himself than to dry sweat, and stepped away from the bar. The routine urged him forward. Movement was safety. Motion restored order. Lift. Pause. Stillness. But the pause stretched too long this time. 5 seconds. 6. He corrected himself, irritation flaring. Discipline mattered. Precision mattered. Letting control slip, even briefly, carried consequences he understood too well. Hey! The voice came gently, from his right. He turned to see a man standing a respectful distance away. Mid-40s, maybe. Broad shoulders. Not flashy, not imposing. Someone who knew his body but didn't feel the need to advertise it. "You okay?" the man asked. The question was simple. No judgment. No assumption. He considered lying. He was good at that. Had been trained to minimize, deflect, compartmentalize. But something in the man's posture, the way he didn't crowd him, didn't rush the silence, made honesty feel safer than usual. "Yeah," he said. The word came out rougher than intended. "Just loud noise." The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." They stood there for a moment, sharing a quiet that felt different from the others he practiced. This one wasn't enforced. It was offered. The man tilted his head slightly. "You military?" The question landed softly, but its weight was undeniable. He hesitated. Giving the truth always felt like opening a door he preferred locked. But denial felt pointless now. The stillness had already said too much. He answered. The man exhaled through his nose, something like recognition passing over his face. "Thought so." No follow-up. No probing. No stories competing for space. Just acknowledgement. "Glad you're here," the man added, then stepped back, returning to his workout as if nothing more needed to be said. Something loosened in his chest. He finished his session in silence, but the silence had changed. It no longer pressed inward. It hovered, attentive, shared. The mocking whispers didn't return. The laughter stayed muted. People glanced at him with something closer to respect, though they might not have had the language for it. Word traveled the way it always did in places like this, quietly, sideways, carried by looks and tone rather than statements. By the time he moved to his final station, the room felt subtly reoriented around him. He noticed small things. A man waited before dropping his weights. Someone turned the music down a notch. The trainer watched him differently now, curiosity replacing critique. He didn't ask for any of it. Attention had never been his goal. But the shift unsettled him nonetheless. Recognition could be dangerous. Being seen had once made men targets. As he completed his last set, the memory returned unbidden. A narrow street. Sun bleaching color from everything it touched. A command passed hand to hand without words. He remembered standing perfectly still behind a wall, counting breaths, waiting for the signal that never came. Remembered the sound that finally broke the silence, and the cost that followed. When he finished, he stood at attention. 3 seconds. The gym did not mock him. No one spoke. The stillness spread outward, fragile but real, as if the room itself had learned to listen. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar settle into his bones. Not relief. Understanding. His workout still looked wrong to those who measured effort by noise and spectacle. But to a few who had noticed the flinch, the restraint, The discipline beneath the surface, it was beginning to look like exactly what it was. A man keeping himself intact. One quiet moment at a time. The day everything changed arrived without warning, wrapped in the disguise of routine. He entered the gym at the same hour, greeted by the familiar hiss of automatic doors and the faint scent of disinfectant layered over old sweat and rubber. The front desk attendant nodded. He returned it. Nothing about the morning suggested it would be different from the dozens before it. Routine lulled the mind that way. It encouraged the dangerous belief that control was permanent. He began his warm-up slowly, deliberately, listening to his joints as if they were instruments needing careful tuning. His body responded predictably, easing into motion, settling into the quiet order he demanded of it. Around him, the gym stirred awake. Treadmills hummed. Music pulsed low and steady. Voices overlapped in fragments of conversation. Lift. Pause. Stillness. By now, fewer people stared. Some even mirrored his restraint unconsciously, lowering weights instead of dropping them, waiting a beat longer between sets. He noticed but did not comment. Influence, he had learned, was strongest when unspoken. He was midway through his second major lift when the music stopped. At first, it felt like an error, a skip track, a technical glitch. The sudden absence of sound was jarring, like pressure change in the ears. People looked up in mild annoyance. Someone laughed nervously. Then the intercom crackled. "Attention everyone," the manager said, his voice unsteady in a way that immediately tightened the room. "We need to pause activities for a moment. There's been an emergency situation outside. Please remain calm." Emergency. The word landed heavy. Conversations ignited in hushed bursts. Phones came out. A woman asked what kind of emergency. Someone joked that it was probably a car accident. He didn't move. Emergencies carried weight. They pulled memory forward whether invited or not. His hands eased the bar back onto the rack with meticulous care, fingers lingering a fraction longer than necessary. He stepped back and stood upright, posture straightening without conscious thought. Then came the sound. Sirens. Not one. Several. Distant at first, then closer, layered, purposeful. The sound cut through the building's walls with surgical precision, bypassing reason and striking something older, deeper. His chest tightened. His breath slowed. Outside, traffic noise faded. The sirens slowed too, then softened, as if being guided rather than chasing something. A man near the front windows leaned forward, squinting. His face changed. It's a procession," he whispered. The word moved through the gym like a current. People drifted toward the windows. The glass revealed a line of vehicles creeping down the street with deliberate slowness. Flags draped across polished surfaces. Lights flashing not in urgency, but in honor. Military funeral procession. The effect was immediate and absolute. No one spoke. He was already at attention. Feet together. Shoulders squared. Chin level. Eyes fixed forward, not on the vehicles themselves but on what they represented. His body knew this posture as intimately as breathing. It had been etched into him long before gyms and civilian routines. Around him, the gym followed instinct rather than instruction. A man mid-set gently re-racked his weights. A woman stepped off her treadmill, her hands instinctively covering her mouth. The trainer bowed his head. Someone placed a hand over their heart. Others simply stood still, uncertain but reverent. The silence deepened. No music. No voices. No clanging iron. Just stillness. For 3 full minutes, the gym transformed into something unrecognizable. The mirrors reflected not flexing bodies or self-scrutiny, but quiet respect. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder without awareness of hierarchy or difference. The usual ego dissolved under the weight of shared humanity. His jaw tightened as names surfaced uninvited. Men he had trained with. Men he had trusted with his life. Men who had laughed loudly and died quietly. He saw faces superimposed over the flags outside, felt the familiar ache settle behind his eyes. He did not salute. Salutes were public. This moment was personal. When the final vehicle passed and the street beyond returned to its ordinary motion, no one moved. It was as if the room needed permission to breathe again. He remained still a moment longer than necessary. Then, slowly, deliberately, he exhaled. The sound seemed to release something in the room. Applause began softly, uncertainly. Not celebratory. Not loud. Just hands coming together in acknowledgement of something sacred that had brushed past them. The clapping spread, then settled, respectful and brief. The trainer approached him, stopping a few feet away, as if crossing an invisible boundary. "I've never seen that," the trainer said quietly. His voice trembled despite himself. "Thank you for showing us what to do." He shook his head once. "Wasn't me," he said. "Was them." The trainer nodded, swallowing hard, and stepped back. No one rushed to restart the music. No one immediately returned to their sets. The gym lingered in that shared quiet, altered by it, unsure how to transition back into normalcy after standing so close to loss. Eventually, movement resumed. Carefully, thoughtfully. He returned to his routine, but something fundamental had shifted. The pauses no longer felt solitary. The stillness was no longer his alone to carry. It had been witnessed, shared, respected. For the first time since he'd started coming here, his presence no longer felt like an intrusion. His workout had never changed. But now, everyone understood why it looked the way it did. And the silence, once mistaken for weakness or confusion, had revealed itself as something far more powerful. It was remembrance, discipline, honor. And it had filled the gym completely. He finished his workout that day the same way he always did, methodically, deliberately, without flourish. Lift, pause, stillness. But the feeling beneath the motions had changed. The weights felt no lighter, yet the burden he carried inside his chest had shifted, redistributed by something as simple and rare as shared understanding. When he wiped down the final bench, his hands moved slower than usual. Not from fatigue, but from awareness. People passed him differently now. Not staring. Not whispering. Just nodding. Making eye contact. Offering quiet acknowledgments that required no reply. "Thank you," someone murmured as they walked past. He nodded once, unsure how to respond to gratitude he didn't believe belonged to him. In the locker room, the noise was subdued. Lockers closed softly. Conversations stayed hushed, as if the silence from outside had followed them in and demanded respect. He sat on the bench longer than usual, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He thought of the flags. He always thought of the flags. Folded into perfect triangles. Handed to grieving families with words that never felt sufficient. He remembered the weight of those moments, heavier than any rucksack he had ever carried. He remembered how the world expected people to move on afterward, to resume life as if something irreplaceable hadn't just been lowered into the ground. He stood, dressed, and left the gym. Outside, the day had fully arrived. Traffic flowed. People hurried along sidewalks with coffees and phones, already distant from the stillness that had briefly overtaken the street. Life moved forward, relentless and indifferent, the way it always had. He walked to his car and paused before opening the door. 4 years, he had lived between worlds. Not fully civilian. No longer military. Carrying habits that didn't translate cleanly into normal life. He had learned to make himself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. He believed that invisibility was the price of peace. But that morning had challenged that belief. He hadn't spoken. Hadn't explained. Hadn't performed. He had simply stood the way he had been taught to stand, honoring something bigger than himself. And somehow, that had been enough. The gym would return to normal soon. Music would resume. Weights would drop again. New faces would come and go, unaware of what had passed through that space. But not everyone would forget. The trainer would remember. The man who had asked if he was okay would remember. The woman who stepped off the treadmill would remember the way silence could feel heavier than sound. And maybe, the next time someone paused too long between sets, or moved with a discipline that didn't match the room, there would be less judgment. Maybe someone would recognize that strength sometimes arrived quietly. The next morning, he returned. Same hour. Same locker. Same corner of the gym. A few people nodded when they saw him. One man paused before dropping his weights and set them down carefully instead. The music felt a notch lower, though that might have been his imagination. He began his routine. Lift. Pause. Stillness. This time, no one laughed. No one whispered. The rhythm of the room adjusted subtly around him, as if accommodating something it now understood had purpose. He still didn't belong in the way others did. He never would. His workout would always look strange to those who measured progress in numbers posted online or bodies sculpted for display. But belonging, he had learned, wasn't about fitting in. It was about being understood without explanation. As he moved through his sets, memories came and went as they always did. Faces, voices, places frozen in time. They still hurt. They always would. But the pain no longer felt like something he had to hide. At the end of his final set, he stepped back and stood at attention. 3 seconds. Not because anyone was watching. Not because it was expected. But because it mattered. When he relaxed, his shoulders dropped, and he felt something close to peace settle over him, not the absence of memory, but the absence of resistance. He could carry what he carried and still exist in the present. As he left the gym, the door closed softly behind him. Inside, life continued. Outside, the world moved on. And somewhere between the iron and the silence, a truth remained, steady and unchanging. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands still. Sometimes it pauses when the world expects motion. Sometimes it honors what cannot be fixed, forgotten, or replaced. His workout had never been wrong. It had been speaking a language few people recognized. Until the silence finally taught them how to listen.